Hello and welcome to News Center. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Trump tariffs, trade are top focus this evening. The world's two largest economies are raising their stakes in an all-out trade war. Just a day after the US clarified its tariffs on Chinese goods now stand at 145%, China has hit back. Beijing has raised the tariff on US goods to 125%. In a statement, the Chinese Commerce Ministry said it will not react to any further tariff increases by the US. Beijing said, and I quote, "Even if the US continues to impose higher tariffs, it will no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of the world economy." End of quote. The statement went on to say, and I quote, "Again, with tariff rates at the current level, there is no longer a market for US goods imported into China." End of quote. China's President Xi Jinping welcomed Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez to Beijing and held bilateral talks. Speaking after the meeting, Jinping said there are no winners in a trade war and China is not afraid in what was his first reaction to the US tariffs. He also called for closer trade relations between China and the European Union. Jinping will visit neighboring Vietnam, Malaysia and Cambodia later this month to boost trade ties. All these nations have been hit with higher tariffs by the Trump administration. The man who started this tariff war remains unfazed. US President Donald Trump called Xi Jinping a good friend and a smart guy, as he expressed optimism about striking a trade deal with China.
What happens with China? We would love to be able to work a deal. They've really taken advantage of our country for a long period of time. All we're doing is putting it back in shape. We're resetting the table. And I'm sure that we'll be able to get along very well. I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries.
Tech giant Apple has airlifted 600 tons or 1.5 million iPhones from India in a bid to beat the new tariffs, according to a Reuters report. Apple shipped about 1.5 million iPhones in cargo weighing roughly 600 tons. The tech giant has been ramping up production in India, which has far lower tariff levies compared to China. But Apple continues to make most of its iPhones in China and has not announced any plans to scale back in China. The Wall Street Journal Asia's business editor, Peter Landers, joins us now. Peter, first of all, the kind of trade tensions between China and the US at this point, China has said that any further tariff increases by the US will just be a joke. They're not practical anymore. How do you see the war escalating? And what are some of the measures that you expect China to take in the coming months?
Possibly the war is finally coming to a close. I'm not sure, but at least China suggested, as you mentioned, that they won't retaliate in terms of higher tariff levels anymore. And the suggestion was really that the tariffs have gotten so high against American goods that it would be very difficult to sell anything American in China anymore. So why bother to retaliate tit for tat, as has been happening so far? And I think the same probably is true of US tariffs on Chinese goods. Now at 145%, it really makes it uneconomical to send anything from China to the US. And that's why we see Apple trying to ship more iPhones from India instead of China. And so I think rather than escalate further, China certainly would love to take Trump up on his offer and sit down at the table to try to make some kind of deal that might incorporate other issues dividing the two countries, such as the app TikTok, which is banned in India and I believe is subject to a potential ban in the United States.
Right. Peter, what's your sense? Do you expect Apple to import more, maybe invest more in manufacturing and deepening its linkages with India?
I do. I think they have no choice unless there's a deal very quickly between the U.S. and China, and the tariffs go back to where they were before Trump became president for a second time. Then Apple would probably try to stick closer to the status quo. And there is a lot of uncertainty about what Trump will do because his tariff policies have changed so frequently, sometimes day by day. So there is uncertainty, but in general, the trend for Apple has already been to increase production in India, perhaps by some estimates we hear, perhaps 15% or more of the iPhones this year will be made in India. And where possible, I think they will try to export more from India to the US to avoid those tariffs.
Right. One more final question, if I would ask you. Now, we will see Xi Jinping making this trip to Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia. What's going to be the kind of foreign policy approach that Xi Jinping could take? Now, the worry is that the space that is being vacated by the US, it will be taken up by China. And do you think China is rushing for that opportunity right now?
They're definitely grasping for that opportunity, meeting more officials from the European Union. And we saw the Spanish Prime Minister in Beijing just today, and Xi Jinping telling Pedro Sanchez that we want to have closer ties, presenting China as a reliable, steady, consistent partner that's clearly making the distinction with the United States. And I'm sure he will deliver that same message when he visits Southeast Asia next week.
Right. Thank you so much, Peter Landers, for joining us and giving us your view on the tariff escalation between US and China and the kind of foreign policy approach that Xi Jinping is now taking in response to US tariffs. And staying